Welcome to Business Insider Live. I'm Eliza Relman, a politics reporter with BI, and we're joined by former California Congresswoman Katie Hill. The Congresswoman has a new book out today called She Will Rise, Becoming a Warrior in the Battle for True Equality, which is part memoir and part feminist political manifesto. Thanks so much for joining us, Congresswoman.
Thanks so much for having me.
So as I'm sure many who are watching already know, you resigned last fall after tabloids and right-wing media published nude photos of you with a campaign staffer. You allege that your ex-husband leaked the photos without your consent after you left him. What convinced you to get back in the public arena, write this book, and launch a PAC?
So honestly, even when I was resigning, I felt this responsibility to all of the people who worked on my campaign, who supported me, who had believed in me. And I felt like if I were to, the decision to resign was hard enough, but I felt like if I were to totally disappear, that I would be doing a disservice, and that I would be, letting them down even further. Sorry, my cat. Anyway, that this is the working from home thing. But so I decided, I needed some time, but immediately I thought I needed to get back into working on the mission that I thought was so important, and having the experience that I did brought into even sharper focus that it has to be around getting true equality for women. So the organization that I started, Her Time, is intended to help more women get into public office, especially young women, women of color, people who are in these long shot kind of races, and to engage and mobilize young women as a voting group, and then to fight for the issues that I lay out in She Will Rise, which are the fundamental legislative issues that I think are going to bring us to equality. But bottom line is, we need to get more women in office, and I felt like me disappearing wouldn't help that, and in fact might hurt it.
Sure. So after your experience with cyber exploitation, you teamed up with some victims' rights attorneys to potentially sue the Daily Mail, which published some of the photos. What's the status of that legal work? And would you like to see your ex-husband criminally prosecuted under revenge porn laws?
Yes, I'd love to see him prosecuted, and their investigation is ongoing. I honestly have no idea why these things take so long, but I suppose that's the nature of the criminal justice system, and I think, it's pretty telling to me that if someone who's as high profile as I am, who's got the direct access to the U.S. Attorney's Office, who are the ones who have the case, if it's this hard for me to get the resources for my case to be pursued, it's so much harder for the average woman who is going through something like this. So, that's one of the pieces of advocacy that needs to happen, is that victims need to be able to hold their victimizers accountable. So that's one thing. The second is on the civil side, we are planning to file. We have been waiting on a date for it for a couple of different reasons. One of which is that we wanted to finalize my divorce with my ex-husband, but he still won't sign the papers. So I am currently get divorced from him, and I am because of COVID, the court date keeps getting pushed back further and further. So we're having to reassess our strategy, and it may end up being the lawsuit happens while I'm still married to him. So either way, that's coming very soon, and I think it's something that's important. It's going to be a tough case. It's kind of this intersection of the First Amendment and the right to privacy, and where that line is drawn. And so we expect this to be a tough court battle. But I think it's important for, how we set the standard for the way that women are treated as they run for office and are in the public eye, no matter what their circumstances.
Got it. So in your book, you call your relationship with a campaign staffer a mistake, but you stop short of characterizing it as unethical. Would you say it was an abuse of power on your part?
The reason I stopped short of that, I think if you're just to look at it from the outside, then yes, you can call it an abuse of power. The reason I stopped short of it is that on the campaign, when we first started and when the relationship started, it was so early, and it felt so much more like like a team of people. It didn't feel like, I mean, we were this grassroots campaign that had no shot, right? Like that it wasn't like I was a member of Congress already. It wasn't like, I was even this well-established candidate. There were 3 people who were working on this together in it. So, it was a mistake. It was, yeah, I mean, if I were to look at it in any other outside circumstances, then I would say it is unethical, and I can own that. But I think that, and I think the very fact of that is part of why I feel so determined to put my effort into this work, even when it would be so much easier to stay away from the public eye and to do something else. Political consulting is an option that probably would make more money than than what I'm doing now.
Sure. So you mentioned in the book also that you believe in redemption for abusers. What do you think that process of redemption looks like in the Me Too era, or should look like?
Well, and when I say I believe in redemption, I mean that I believe in redemption as a concept. And I think that people who make any kind of mistake, that one act does not define a person, and that a good person might do bad things. And, how do we assess that kind of on the whole? And I don't think we as a society have really figured that out. You look at our criminal justice system. What does 30 years in prison make? Does that qualify you as having been redeemed? Is it a personal thing that has to do with you and religion and whatever terms you come to on your own conscience, or is it acts of service? Is it something else entirely? And for me, I think that that's something that we need to grapple with, and I'm trying to chart my own course on what I think it's going to take to earn redemption. I don't think I'm there yet, but I'm certainly trying.
Yeah, so I mean, in the book and also in so many public appearances, you've been very candid about, some of the most personal and painful experiences in your life. Other young women in politics, I'm thinking of members of the squad like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar, have also been very open with their personal struggles. Do you think it's fair to ask women entering politics to be this vulnerable and exposed?
I don't know that there's anything fair in politics, especially when it comes to how women are treated, and what's expected of us. I do think, though, that part of what has made our generation of young women running for politics different is that we are talking about these things. We are genuine, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible, and sharing our lived experiences that are so common across the spectrum, I think is part of what makes it powerful. I think it's part of what motivates people, voters, just people getting involved, because they can relate. They say, okay, this is a real person. This is someone who's been through the same kind of struggles that I have, and has, is working to change it, and has also made it through, which is part of, why I talk about these kinds of things in the book. I don't think there's a fairness element to it at all, but I think that it's something that, when you're able to, whether you're a male politician or a female politician, I think sharing your personal stories and even those parts that are really, really difficult to share, I think it can have a big impact on people.
Yeah. I know you're working with women who are thinking about running for office, or who are for the first time. Have you talked to candidates who, are scared off by that kind of exposure?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the first things people ask me is, with what happened to you, what's your advice? And honestly, the biggest advice that I have, or the biggest thing that I say, is that, what happened to me, I think, is probably the worst case scenario. So think about that in how you would handle it, and if you had been in my position, what you would have done. If you can work through that exercise, then you will be able to handle whatever it is that comes to you. And it's a lot to ask. It is true public service to say you're going to have to possibly stand up to something that's really, really awful, but that we need you, and that we need, the reason that you're here as somebody who is running for office is that you're tough as nails, and that is something, there are people who will support you no matter what. And you've got a whole sisterhood of women who have been in similar situations that are there to have your back. So, I don't think that my advice is the most encouraging, except for to say that I'm here, I'm alive, I'm not going away. And, I think that hopefully that's encouraging to other women.
So you briefly wrote about how women were among your biggest critics on the campaign trail. And during the Democratic primary in 2018, your male opponent won far more women voters than you did. Why do you think that is?
I think we all have an internalized vision of what makes a powerful person or what makes a leader. And that's contradictory to a lot of the things that we want to see in women, where equality is ambition. I mean, we're seeing this in the VP race. Qualities like, speaking up, being assertive, being risk-taking, all of those are seen as positives when they're in a man, but when they're in a woman, we often tear them down. And so that's something that even as women we do against other women. And I think that we have to really be cognizant of that and aware of it. To be clear, and I think this is important too, the gap with women that I had against my opponent was specifically women over the age of 45. And since women over the age of 45 tend to be much heavier voters, that made up for the gap. But I won by 15 to 20 points with women under that age. So I think we are, as a generation and as time progresses, becoming more aware of that and not having that same kind of harshness towards each other. But hopefully we can start to see the same kind of desire to uplift each other across the board.
So your district just elected a Republican, Mike Garcia, by a pretty wide margin in the special election to replace you in May. Why do you think your former constituents went for a conservative Republican? And should this be, concerning for Democrats in swing districts across the country?
So the special election to replace me was a runoff, which made it a May election, and it was the only thing on the ballot, and it was the first in the state of California that was done all by mail. So it was an election that people were not aware of largely. COVID had just happened, so any kind of field campaign that we would have run on the Democratic side was, canceled. And it was something where, Democrats depend on turnout. And that's the case in, 2018 when I won, and it'll be the case in the fall. When people don't turn out, the ones that do reliably are older, white, and Republican. And that's what we saw in this May election. So I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that. And those are being taken into account as we move into November. But importantly, November election have an entirely different electorate, which is far more favorable to a Democratic candidate. So I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to flip the seat again. And Christy Smith, the candidate, the Democratic nominee, she's really talented. She'd be a great legislator, and she'd be someone who is representative of the district. Mike Garcia is in lockstep with Donald Trump and the Republican leaders. And, we saw Hillary Clinton won my district by 7. I won my district by 9. And that's not a coincidence. That is a representation of what the district truly wants and is moving towards. I think Mike Garcia in the special election is a blip and reflective of how hard it is for Democrats when we don't get the electorate that we need, when we aren't able to convert people into votes, when we aren't able to get that turnout.
Yeah, many people voted by mail in that special election. Are you concerned that Democratic voters, aren't prepared to vote en masse by mail in the fall?
It's one of my biggest concerns, and I know that across the board, the DNC and the DCCC and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, they're all working on making sure that we're addressing that. But for all we hear about Donald Trump being against vote by mail, to me it's wild, because Republicans historically benefit from voting by mail. That's typically the base of people who rely on it most and who use it most. consistently. So I do have a lot of concerns about how many voting centers are going to be closed, and where people who vote every 4 years. That let's just say that they're presidential voters, they're not consistent midterm voters. That they're not going to know what to do, and they might get something in the mail, they don't trust it, they might think that it's fake, they might think, well, what do I do with this? I don't trust just mailing it back in. And they might say, like, I'm going to wait until election day and go vote. And turns out there's nowhere to vote, or that the lines are so long with the limited polling places. And I think that, we really, really need to be assertive and aggressive on campaigning, not just to try and convince people. I think most people have pretty much already made up their minds. It's about making sure that they know how to vote, and do so in the crazy conditions that we have because of COVID.
Sure. I know you've said recently that you don't feel ready to run for office again at this point, but you haven't ruled it out. Under what circumstances would you run again?
Oh, gosh, that's hard to even imagine. I mean, I think I wasn't planning on running for office in the first place, and I would not have predicted a situation like what happened in 2017 when I decided to run. So it's hard for me to try and play with that idea of what kind of a seat would open up, and also what else is going on in my life, right? I mean, there's a lot of the job is really hard. It takes a deep amount of sacrifice, and I know that in the position I'm in now, I'm able to help a lot of women who are willing to make that sacrifice and who deserve a seat at the leadership table. And that doesn't necessarily have to be me. So I don't know that there's imminently going to be a reason for it to be me in any conceivable election, but there might be one, and if so, then I'll look into it, and I guess we'll see from there.
Sure. I know you live in Washington these days. Are you in touch with any of your former House colleagues?
Oh, absolutely. Those are, in a way, you're in the trenches with those folks, and especially my freshman colleagues. And it was the 116th Congress, I think, is going to go down in history for a lot of fascinating and historic moments. And you become close to these people. That doesn't go away. And I'm grateful for those friendships, and I'm grateful that the restrictions are easing a little bit so that we can at least go out and have a drink outside.
Yeah. So as we all know, Joe Biden is getting ready to announce his vice presidential running mate. Could even happen while we speak. Who do you hope he chooses? And do you think he should pick a Black woman?
So I endorsed Kamala Harris as for president from the very beginning of her campaign. I know her, I trust her, I think she's an incredible leader, and I was happy to support her and campaign for her from day one. So I would love to see his VP choice be Kamala. That said, I think that everyone that we're seeing in the running is talented and would add something completely different to the ticket, and I have no problem with any of them. I do think that this is the moment for a Black woman, with everything that we've seen in terms of the intersection of racial injustice and gender inequity and everything else in this moment. I think that it's the right time for that. So I hope that happens. But at the end of the day, it's about supporting this ticket that has to be Donald Trump.
So I know you're launching a new podcast that you're calling Naked Politics. What will that be focused on, and who are you talking with for it?
Yeah. So the podcast is focused on basically the dirty stuff that goes on with politics, the things that you often don't hear about because it's watered through a lens of secrecy, or you have candidates or elected officials who are running and who don't want you to see that kind of thing, and that the entire system is sort of built on secrecy. So we have so I'm bringing on guests that specifically are willing to talk about that kind of thing. For example, one of my first guests is Bill Burton, who was President Obama's press secretary for his first term, and then left the White House in order to start the first super PAC on the Democratic side that was in the wake of the Citizens United decision. So it allowed basically the big money to come, unlimited amounts of money to come flowing in that we knew was going to happen on the Republican side, and Democrats had to try and figure out how to do on the Democratic side. So really talking to him about what that looks like and how what we do compares to the Republican side. And then also the world of political consulting, which is what he does. What that means, where you'd even, if you wanted to run, where you'd even find a political consultant, what you need it for, and how they can take advantage of candidates, especially first-time candidates. So, the next person that I am planning on interviewing is someone who has been in DC politics on the organizational side, let's say, for a very long time. Who, was a political director for the Teamsters and political director for a number of different organizations, and is working on it as a consultant now. So she's kind of got the freedom to say things that she otherwise might not. But we're probably going to get into a little bit more of the gossipy side of things and just the sordid nature of what goes on in Washington. I'm excited about that one. So the purpose is to really kind of let people see an inside view of how this whole thing works, what's wrong with it, how we can fix it, and hopefully through that understanding we can mobilize people even more.
Great. Congresswoman, we're out of time, but thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We hope you and
It's
your
great to
family
talk to you.
are great. And for everyone
Thank
watching, just a reminder, her book is called She Will Rise, Becoming a Warrior in the Battle for True Equality. Thanks for watching Business Insider Live, and we'll be back with more soon.